Welcome everybody, hi. My name's Emma King and welcome to another conversation brought to you by the Castlemaine Commons Collective. We're a small group of locals who we got together in the response to the pandemic lockdown, which is remarkably
my name's Emma King.
Months ago. Just let me... And what we aim to do with our programs here and the other work we do in the community is to foster connections, make sense of what's happening, catalyse action, and to help events, to help create a local future. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're, most of us, on the land of the Jarrah people and of the Dja Dja Wurrung Nation, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and the new emerging ones, and to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded on this country. So yeah, welcome to guests. This week we're wanting to look at a range of the areas and actions that we as in our communities can consider when we're talking about preparing for the upcoming fire season. And we'll talk a bit more shortly about the context of that. And later on, we'll talk a bit about where we're hoping this conversation may lead in our local neighbourhoods and communities. And also like at this point to shout out to all the people from the local neighbourhood resilience groups who hopefully are in our audience, both the existing ones and also the people who are really stepping up at the moment to form those local connections and resilience groups in their own communities. So yeah, we're really hoping this will be part of that process in the region to really build our connections. And fire season is a good way to bring a lot of people together. So hoping this conversation will be a good catalyst as part of that process. So yeah, I want to start by welcoming our guests. Thanks very much for being part of this. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Firstly, Cam Walker. He's the Friends of the Earth campaign coordinator and will be helping me co-host, I hope, this evening, which I really appreciate. Louise Scott. She's the Safer Together community-based bushfire management project officer, which is, I had to read because it was a bit of a mouthful, but it's a very important role, I think, with communities and across agencies, and she's based with the CFA. Hamish MacCallum, he's a wildfire management consultant and also the Fryerstown CFA Brigade Captain, and he's the captain of the brigade I'm in as well, and we live in the same community, just for a bit of letting people know how we all know each other. And a big welcome as well to Lorraine Laplastria, who is she's an amazing local activist with the Mount Alexander Shire Disability Advocacy Group and a range of other things. It's very engaged in our community, and we really appreciate all of you being here for this conversation. So I just want to do, the first thing we're going to do is really do a bit of setting the frame or the context for this conversation. So I'm just going to talk for a little bit longer and then about this, where we are with the resilience projects and what's been happening in the local community. Then Cam and Hamish will follow up with some of the work that they've been doing as well and their knowledge to share. So as I mentioned before, there's been like some really beautiful emerging and consolidating of neighbourhood connections and resilience groups in response to the pandemic. Some of them were already operating earlier than that, like the West End Resilience Group, some of you may be aware of, that we've talked about previously in the Castlemaine Commons shows. But there's also a number of people, as I mentioned, who are really wanting those connections in their communities, particularly people who are, maybe not as connected in with other networks through the communities, and really want to have that place-based neighbourhood, and the local connections that you can have with people that you live close by, and you can form those relationships and mutual aid, sharing and looking after each other, that this community is generally quite good at. So that's one of the things I think that's really prompted this conversation, is to look at, well, what are the communities already doing? What are people wanting to do? And how we can use the existing networks to enhance our community fire preparation, and how we can use fire preparation to enhance our community connection. Because I think it sort of works both ways, that having these conversations will help us to get more coherent and more connected, but it'll also build on the existing networks that we already have. So I think it's a really lovely sort of both two-way sort of building of those things. And the other context that we're working in is the season change. As we're coming into spring, it's been a beautiful wildflower season this year, and a lot of people are getting out into the local bush, but I think with the change in the weather and the weather warming up, it also, particularly after last year's fires, brings a level of anxiety and a real awareness that we're heading into another summer, another fire season, and people are really keen to talk to each other and work out how we can manage that better. So that's what this conversation is really about, is trying to bring out some of those ideas about what we can do, and then later on local groups can deepen that knowledge and work out what's going to work for their particular places and their particular communities. So that's probably enough from me for the moment. And I really like, I think the sort of bigger global context is really important to bring in here as well, Cam. So I'll hand over to you to have a bit of a chat about that.
Thanks, Emma. So I was going to talk about the climate change impacts of fire. And of course, we all understand that this is a continent that burns. Fire has been part of our landscapes for many, many millions of years. Many of our vegetation systems are either fire adapted or fire dependent. That is, they need fire at certain intervals to be able to reproduce and to be really healthy ecologically. And of course, Aboriginal people have used fire as one of their land management tools for hundreds of generations. So we understand that. The problem is, with human-induced climate change, what we're doing is laying on top of the normal fire cycle another level of fire, and this is ramping up, and it's potentially ramping up exponentially. So if we think back to last summer and how terrible that was, that's what a climate change influenced fire season looks like. So what we need to understand is it's a little bit like a car. Suddenly we've got, instead of a regular engine, we've got a supercharged engine. So the fires are still there. It's just the power behind them is so much greater, and it's greater because of the power in the system. And the power in the atmospheric system comes from the rising temperatures. So we've now hit a little bit over 1 degree Celsius beyond pre-industrial levels of background warmth. Here in north central Victoria, we've got less rain in the cool season. We've got above average temperatures on a more regular basis. We have longer droughts. We have longer fire seasons. And so everything is starting to put energy into the system that makes these fires worse. We've known about this for years. Back in 2008, Ross Garner, who's an economist that probably many of you will remember, that's written very widely, he did the Garner Review for the Australian government. He very clearly identified that the energy that's going into the atmosphere around climate change would start to supercharge fire seasons. He said this in 2008. He said it should be observable by 2020. So he was spot on the money. So basically, every fire season now has this extra level of intensity on top of it. This is just accepted facts now. The CFA accepts it. We've had 3 government inquiries since last summer's fires. We had the Federal Bushfire Royal Commission. It was explicitly directed not to look at climate change, but it found that climate change was a driving factor behind last summer's fires. We had the New South Wales government inquiry. It found the same thing. And the Victorian inquiry, the first report has just been released, just been tabled in Parliament. And it also noted that basically the past can no longer be the template we use to understand fires of the future, because climate change is making them all very, very different. And there's a couple of things that are really important. Obviously, we're going to live with fire, but fire will become more dominant and it will become more intense and more pervasive as fire seasons grow longer. That has a couple of implications for us. One is the fact that, you know, as volunteers, as career firefighters, we use planes for firefighting and we share them across jurisdictions. So as we look to California now and it's fire season blowing out, that means that their people aren't available to come and help us. So we're going to have more pressure on our volunteer and our career firefighting resources, including air resources. That's really important, I think, to understand. And the other thing is to understand that fuel reduction, which is often, you know, suggested that this is the way we're going to deal with this problem, becomes less effective under severe fire conditions. So as a panacea, it can't be a panacea. So they're two really, really important things we need to remember. And then just to wind up, to bring me back perhaps to a slightly happier place, every spring, I always forget what it is, the BNHCRC, so the Bushfire and Natural Hazards Cooperative Research Centre, issues a statement about what the season will be like. The good news for us is we're expecting an average season, a season of average activity. They're not suggesting there will be campaign fires, that is large fires as happened last summer. The Mallee, the Wimmera and Southwest Vic are actually a little bit too dry for this time of year, but we are getting good soil moisture, which will slow down the drying of vegetation. So thankfully, plus we've got a La Nina event, which is forming, which tends to mean more rain in the north. Some of that will hopefully come south. So it means hopefully a mild summer, a summer that isn't full of, you know, the horror that happened last year. And I'd expect that the firefighters will be going west this year to fight grass fires rather than east into the mountains to fight forest fires. So that's a little bit of good news. And I guess hopefully we can use that to our advantage and prepare for, you know, the worst seasons that are coming.
Definitely, thanks for that, Cam. And I think it's good to keep in mind the specific realities of each season as we go into it. But I think it's also a good segue into what you're going to be talking about, Hamish. And like Cam mentioned, like that our career and volunteer firefighters are going to be, you know, in these big seasons are fully stretched. So I think having a bit of a picture as well about what we as local communities can do to maximise our protection or mitigate the fire risk for our communities is a really important part of this conversation too. So I know you've got some pictures and some information about what some local communities have been doing. So over to you.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, look, Cam was certainly right on the point with climate change, and very much I think it's a twofold problem in that, yes, we have a climate that is predisposing much more intense and longer fire seasons, but we also have a major problem with land management and also our cultural attitudes towards landscape that is leading to much more significant fuel loads in and around our properties and in the broader landscape. And so it's a twofold thing. We need to look at how we manage our landscapes on a personal level around our households, but also collectively as a community. How can we look at the commons, the land that used to be managed collectively throughout, historically our ancient cultures and the traditional Australian cultures with burning practices. And so I certainly like to look at a holistic approach to how we might handle that. And I think I'll actually just show you a few photographs of some examples of how a couple of communities have worked together to manage landscape. I'll just see if I can share my screen with everyone. And how's that? Can you see my PowerPoint presentation? Brilliant. Okay. So yes, as Emma mentioned, we live in Fryers Forest Eco Village, and we manage our landscape collectively as a community, and for two purposes. We do forest management, but we specifically do fire management in and around the village. We have 11 freehold titles. We have an owners corporation model. We have the village council and the clustered village infrastructure. So we're not too far spread out, so we can work together much more easily. We have domain management groups, of which one of the domains is the fire management domain. And so we're responsible as a smaller tight group for the working bees and any initiatives that we undertake to look at clearing up fire fuels in and around our properties. So, well, you know, fire agencies can only really play a supporting role in bushfire management. So it really is down to communities to do as much as they can to be more self-reliant. We need to, hold on. I'll move straight on to just our basic structure with the domains. Has a community appointed fire officer who liaises with the other agencies and neighbours around us as well. So that's just the basic model of how we operate. There's a quick map looking at the village in the middle there, the 11 lots where the intensive work happens. The red line is the area that we focus on for fuel reduction buffer, and then the broader landscape around where we do strategic fire management, which includes proposed cultural burning as part of that. So basic overview of our forest management. With forestry, we do sustainable pro-silver forestry techniques in over our 300 acres. We have areas where we don't touch at all. We do fire clearing, cultural burning, and the more intensive land management. And we work together as much as possible. It brings us together. People who don't normally talk to each other are out working on the land together. We're enjoying it, enjoying the bush, and it's an opportunity for connection that we don't normally have. I'll quickly move on to another example, which is probably more relevant to people in and around Castlemaine, which is the Spring Creek community in Hepburn. I lived there back in 1999-2000, and on a property, 2.5 acre property, where we were managing animals and planting trees and managing weed vegetation down the community creek, Spring Creek and Doctor's Gully, and has seen an amazing transformation into a really fire resilient landscape that was subject to fire just recently in Hepburn. And I was at that fire, and the fire was virtually stopped in its tracks. I mean, partly that was weather, but vegetation had a lot to do with the track at the fire, which was amazingly stopped in the gully. So a quick look at the photos. Hand tools, goats, planting fire retardant trees. It's all very slow and small solutions. That's David Holmgren in the photograph there, and a bunch of fire analysts from CFA having a look at the result of all of that work and how the fire actually affected it. There we have fire retardant acacia melanoxylon planted as timber species, and David mulching down a pile of fire fuel. Here we have some oak trees and other deciduous trees planted in the creek. Deciduous trees are absolutely fantastic as landscape trees for reducing radiant heat and catching embers. This is a funny photo, right up in amongst all of those blackberries. Where my cursor is, if you can see my cursor, is a local farmer grazing his sheep on the blackberries and creating a fuel break. His property sits just at the top of that ridge. So a great example of how the community are doing this kind of ad hoc land management to reduce fire fuels and get something back from that landscape at the same time. That's us down the creek, out on the edge of where the burn stopped down in the gully. And here you can see more deciduous trees. There's some chestnut trees, and down in the gully where the creek is, nice and lush. The temperature down there is significantly different to up out in the open. And just quickly, there's an example further up the creek where DELP have done planned burns. It's a very different result in land management. And here there is a much more prevalence of very high prone vegetation and drying of the landscape. So quite a different result in different land management. It's not to say planned burning can't be really good, but it's all about timing. So yeah, look, I think that's all I've got to share with the examples of how people can work together. There's a lot more details about how it's really site specific. You know, it all depends on your landscape and your community and your energy levels. And, you know, you have to find a model that fits. So getting together and having a look at your risks and having a look at who owns what land and, you know, how can you manage it? Can you get away with doing a bit of management on land that's actually public land? You know, I would say just go for it. If you're reducing fire fuels, you know, that's got to be a positive result for your local community. So I think certainly Louise would have a lot more to say about how we can work more in effective community teams.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of information that you've just sort of included in that, Hamish, which is great to sort of cover a real breadth of information. And we will be posting some links to sites and other talks and things that people will be able to tap into if they're wanting to get more detail there. Cam, did I see you indicating you wanted to? You're like, no? Oh, sorry. Must have been scratching your head or something. Yeah. And I think, you know, there is such a broad range of activities that communities can undertake. And I think, you know, we're looking there at some very small localized examples. And so maybe, Louise, I could bring you in here to have a bit more of, let us know about what your role is and what that sort of agency level community engagement is that happens and that people can tap into to support the work they want to do in their own communities.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show tonight. So I guess I'll explain a little bit about my role, and it is a long title, and I guess where these roles came from. So back in 2016, there was an investigation after an escape plan burn and some recommendations at the same time by the IGEM, so the Inspector General of Emergency Management, recommended that agencies and communities, I guess, work more closely together. And so Safer Together as a program was launched then, and one component of that was the community first stream, I suppose. And there's a number of us that sit in, and I would say 8, but there's been a few more. So originally there were some of us in CFA and some in DELP, in Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And recently there's also a couple of people in local governments working in, I guess, essentially a community development role, helping, I guess, supporting, I shouldn't say helping, communities to connect. I guess the fundamentals of it are connecting people, and as Hamish said, understanding their own risk and a community level risk, and then working out what they can do together as a community. So I guess more community-led and participatory rather than, I guess, the traditional model that we've often used in government of going in and telling people what they should do and then going away again. So this is more long-term community development, coming up with some solutions together and then just continuously improving that. So I guess to demonstrate that, we work in some high fire risk communities across the state. So they go through a process of regional committees and things to be identified, like the suitability. And I'm lucky that Fryerstown is one of mine that I work with. So I've been working with Fryerstown for a couple of years, and I guess it's as I said, a facilitation sort of supporting role, but some examples of things I guess we've done in that time, or the community has done. One is around fuel management. So as Hamish said, you know, there's a lot that can be done. So we sat down with some agency people who hadn't had these conversations together. So there was just a small group of us, looked at, on a map. There's a lot you can do with maps and Google. Looking from an aerial sort of view, you know, who manages all these little parcels of land, and did they know that they were meant to manage them? So one of them, I guess, is the pine forest in Fryerstown, and that was a school pine forest, but you know, the school's not operating as a Department of Education school anymore. So who actually is looking after that? That's one example. And then down the track, we'll build on, you know, what can we actually do about that? So what part of Fryerstown and the land surrounding it, where could you reduce the spread of really bad fires, and where could we tackle some things together? Another really good tool around the maps was using a huge aerial photo laminated, and at a community events, people would stick a sticker on and identify where their property is, and then they came up with the idea to put a number, and then on a corresponding piece of paper, people could actually go, I've never met that person, where are they, and seat them out in the room. So it's really about connecting, understanding the landscape that you're living, understanding fire behaviour. But I guess one thing I'm really passionate about is planning for recovery. So I guess, you know, what would it look like if you were impacted? Like, what would you miss, and how would you make that go more smoothly? There's a range of people in local brigades as well that you can, I guess, get local knowledge from. So each brigade has a nominated, elected community safety coordinator, as well as the captain and other brigade members. And then I sit within the community safety team in CFA. So yeah, we have people in our team who can also support communities. And I guess this year in particular, it's quite limited what we can do with the COVID situation. So this is really the time for communities to pull together and, you know, call on an existing networks and be innovative about how they might connect. Another community I work with, we're talking about getting calico bags printed with road names and things. So it was a local, you know, reusable bag. So each time you go to the supermarket, it's about your community. On the other side was a few tips, and then inside they were planning on putting just a little bit of literature, not a lot, but about how you could be involved. So you could be involved in plenty of different ways, and that community and brigade have like a WhatsApp group. So if they have an event, they can just put a little message out to support, I suppose, members of the community, and they'll come together and do what needs to be done to make those events successful. So yeah, there's lots of things out there that can be done. And
I think that's I think for me, like, that's where you've got the agency and the CFA doing their sort of agency role, which as you've described, and then there's the vegetation management thing. But I think the thing that I really love about the work that we're doing with the Commons as well is there's building, like, encouraging that community level connection and resilience, where people actually, it's about people in their communities getting to know each other, and identifying what the specific needs of the people in their community are. And I think maybe, Lorraine, maybe I could bring you in to have a bit of a chat about that, because a lot of this is very, you know, I think I'll just throw it over to you. I'm sure you've got some things to say there.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
You're a little bit soft, but yeah.
All right. First of all, a little bit of background. I'm a visual artist. I also play in an orchestra, and I'm a woman in a wheelchair. So there's a little bit of a tumbling around of, outlooks and attitudes. And if you can just take this little bit of humour in there, I'm also the chairperson of MASDAG, the Alexandershire Disability Advocacy Group. And MASDAG we do like the DAG bit on the end, we deliberately chose it that way. But MASDAG is a very impressive group of people who are working together to deal with problems and emergencies. We have people who are vision impaired, people who have had brain injury, people with a mental disability, we have physical disabilities, we have carers, and we have people who are professional disability workers. So those people are working together to try and identify difficulties and problems. And emergencies and bushfires are certainly a major problem for us. Once upon a time, I was in Region 13, which covers CFA Region 13, which covers Healesville, Lilydale, Yarra Glen, Kinglake, and Marysville. And I was the group communications officer for that region. And so there I've got a background in fires and CFA. And even at this stage where I'm no longer involved in the CFA, whenever I hear that siren in the background, there's an instant alert, always, always. So some of you recognize that too, I can see by the way you're nodding. And the other interesting thing for you, Louise, is it was a really hard fight for actually to register women in the CFA, and myself and a woman from Swan Hill actually put in quite a battle to have that come about. So that's well done. But it is really, what we're gathering together is really about saving lives as well as preserving the beautiful bush that we live in. So MASDAG was very involved in dealing with the difficulties of COVID-19, and from that we've already stepped forward to looking at what might happen in terms of emergencies, and we're all very seriously concerned about those aspects of how to deal with emergencies with people with disability. My experience has been that if you're used to patterns of things that happen in your everyday life, whenever there are serious fires, they're gone. Like those patterns are just not there anymore. Everything seems to change, and the usual things you can rely upon are significantly different. And I think that's a really good and important piece of understanding to share with people. Those fires that were in Hepburn, I was invited to go up there to the meeting afterwards where there is a review of that. And one of the things that surprised most of the people there was that the things that they would do, like accustomed to ring someone or get in touch with someone, couldn't get through on their phones, or the people weren't in the town on the weekend. It was a weekend fire. But those things are really important knowledge that we should share with each other and learn to be aware of and consider them in how we might do our plans to actually look out for each other and keep on that resilience pattern. I have been involved. I was in a house fire as a child, and the house that I lived in that Region 13, the old lady that lived there before me, that house was burned down. And in one of the more recent fires, my son Michael, he rang, he said, "Mum, your house is gone." So the pattern of the fire was actually, repeating itself in those areas across there. One of the things that MASDAG has tried to focus on is beginning discussions about places of last resort and about making emergency preparations for fire. So is it appropriate, Emma, for me to go on in that sense?
Yeah, no, that'd be lovely just to get a bit of a picture of what you guys are doing and maybe where we can support as well if there's things that we can do from outside MASDAG. Yeah. Well,
one of the things that we have been discussing is that, again, many of the expectant patterns that we used to fall apart. You lose electricity Transport is a problem. Shire workers might not be available, and nothing really can be consistently relied upon. And I think aged people are particularly vulnerable. And in the Mount Alexander Shire, we have higher than average figures of aged people here. And also in the terms of disability, we have higher than average figures of people with disability too. So prior discussions, many people are wondering, you know, what will happen to them. And I was talking to another woman who is confined physically, and I said to her, now what's going to happen in terms of a fire? And she said, I'm just going to stay home and die. I don't know where to go or what to do. And that just about broke my heart, you know, that we have to do something. Yeah. So, and another thing, when I was thinking about this talk tonight, I was thinking, you're aware that the people who were rescued in Malakuta, there were people down there in wheelchairs who were not rescued because there was no planning for them about how to get them onto the boat in their wheelchairs and things like that. And I think it's really important to thinking of those things early so that we can include those, and what is it that we can do, you know? I think it's really important that we can become aware of needs of people with disability. And we're having initial discussions with Luke Ryan, from some of you may know his responsibility with the Shire. So he's keen to work with us. But one of the things that we need serious planning about is methods of transport for people to get to safe places. Wheelchair accessible buses are rare. I know recently there's been a project across Victoria called the Healthy Hearts Project. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but that's been doing some work on the Campbell's Creek Path and how to get people more active and things. But one of the really good things is I've been working with them, and one of the really good things is that they've got a bus for the Shire now that has wheelchair access. And that's the only bus that the Shire has, so that's terrific. That's one breakthrough. But I think we need to have a plan about how to somehow get those people into safer spaces. And it's a really important one to work through. There's one disabled taxi, not disabled taxi, one with disabled access. The hospital has some buses, Windaring has some buses, and it's possible that we could involve the Whitmore buses, you know, the local buses. So becoming aware and planning and listening to people who are aged and people with disabilities is essential.
Mm. I'm wondering, I'm curious, you mentioned that the pandemic and the lockdown actually got you thinking about some of these things. And were the things that you learned, I know that, and particularly the first lockdown, when we were really unsure about how to manage and where we were going to get our food and whether we could go out and things, did that help to inform, like, what sort of that relationship you've got? How does that feed into what you're thinking about?
That, in a sense, the other connection that MASDAC has is we're very connected to Community House, which is very valuable in terms of, you know, the things that they do involve communities. And I think we were able to get in touch with them with people contacted us, that people who had run out of food or people who didn't have masks or things like that. So their element of being connected with them was very important.
Yeah, because I think, one of the things I think that's been interesting about the network and the resilience groups that have sprung up in the pandemic is they're not all place-based. Some of them are, you know, I know Naldarin did an amazing job of supporting their community with food and transport and necessities. So yeah, I think maybe that's something that, in terms of building the resilience network, some of them are issue or based rather than place based. So it's part of that conversation, I think, and that integration of the needs of specific people in specific places, but how we can then network that in with the service providers who have the resources to, as you said, for example, pick people up and take them to a safe place. And I've just seen we've got a question from the audience. do we have a safe place in Castlemaine where people can go in the event of a fire? Maybe Cam, do you know, or Hamish?
Louise, are you aware? I'm not sure. I thought it was the football oval, the sports complex.
Yeah.
Don't know.
So I think
Victory
it's
Park.
Street at the present time, which is
So
out in the open. That's a
it's
place
Victory
for
Park.
I guess I was just going to say, not only are they called neighbourhood safe places, but they're also bushfire places of last resort. So I guess they're not the first place that you would go. But on the CFA website, there's actually, you can type it in, I suppose, even in Google, and it'll come up with a list in your municipality of where they are. So just looking at this list, and this sometimes can change, so I guess don't have it concrete in your mind. They have assessments and things. It's not my area of expertise, but Campbell's Creek Community Centre, Castlemaine is Victory Park and Mostyn Street between Barker Street and Hargrave Street. Yeah, so it's your last resort place though. So I guess on this matter, I was just going to there's a couple of new resources. So the CFA have just released or launched an e-learning module for community workers, but that could be used by, I guess, anyone themselves. So there's templates and things online, and I know that's not accessible to anyone, but to everyone, but where community workers who, and I'll just see if I can find the actual term. So do you work with clients or patients in their home, supporting them to live independently? Who needs to be prepared, different types of risk environment, understanding the role of the worker and how to help clients, questions to start the conversation, building a plan, 6 key areas, advice for clients who don't or can't leave or who don't want to make a plan. And I guess part of it is just even making time to make a plan. Like, we're all so busy, and it's way down the list often about, making a plan for fire. It's something that, well, it might not happen to me, so I'll just leave that for later. So making the space for these conversations is amazing, but also making space for yourself to think about it. These packages also have a referral pathway and some resources and templates and things that can be used. So that's really new on the CFA website, like in the last couple of weeks. And I think there's a second stage to that, to actually like train people to go out and do it. The other one is collaboratingforinclusion.org. So there's a lot of work that's been done already in this space, and there's some really good templates on there. So I'll give you the link, Emma, as well. But yeah, there's resources out there. But yeah, I guess neighbourhood safer places. And this came up at an event in Castlemaine, which actually sparked the conversation for the MASDAG, broadening of the conversation, where people were asking, Cam, I think you might have been there, were asking, where do I go? Where do I go? And when are you going to tell me where to go? And I guess nobody is more invested in what to do than themselves. So, we can't make the decision for you. It's just really personal. And that was also around animals. And I won't even go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's really thinking about what you're going to do with yourself and your animals and, your family. And, having more than one plan is key as well, because I've worked with people and spoken with people whose plan was always to leave early, but the fire started next door. So then what do you do? So I guess it's having a number of plans. Yeah.
And I think it's yeah, that's great. And I think I'll post a lot of those links, and the resources will be posted on the Castlemaine Commons Facebook page and shared in various locations. But I suppose it raises the question as well about the levels of stress and anxiety that people feel. I mean, there's this issue of people who already have mental health issues and maybe aren't in a position to be able to make a plan for themselves for whatever reason that is, or the higher level of stress that people feel leading into the fire season as well, I think is something. And people have written in the chat, there's a need for places that are not last resort, especially during hot days. So people who are maybe living in accommodation that, if you've got a heat wave, there's it's a code red day, but it's not actually a fire, if you don't feel safe staying at home, we need to have that conversation as well about, I know some people go to the library, but we can't even do that at the moment, you know. So yeah, where are those places, and how do we, you know, where do we go with that conversation? Hamish, you were
to say on that. Sorry, Louise, just quickly, if I could just mention that houses are in many instances a very good place to shelter from fire if they're well prepared. And that's a message that we shouldn't lose and rely on evacuating to somewhere else. We can't, you know, with increasing fire seasons, we can't continue to uproot our lives and move somewhere else that is deemed to be safe when we have the opportunity to make our homes that place. It does require work. It does require some attention. There's lots of great information about how to do that. And, you know, part of the regulations for building in bushfire prone areas is about making our houses a place to shelter. And, you know, that is a conversation I think that we can also continue to have as communities, and to look at maybe by understanding the risks and understanding how our landscape might, how our houses might benefit us, we might reduce some of the anxiety that happens as well.
Lorraine?
Yes, if I could just share something there. A friend of mine from South Australia did something which I think is really remarkable. She put, if the house is shaped like that at the roof, she halfway down the roof, she put these metal pipes across so that when the fire came with embers, those drips could come down and go into the spouting, you know, which was then blocked off. And I thought, well, that's a really impressive thing, something to consider, you know. Yeah.
And there are some, Hamish did a great sort of hour-and-a-half talk about, you know, preparing your home for fire, which we'll post a link to that as well, because that more specific, you know, personal thing. We've got a few questions coming in. I'm just aware that we're heading for 10 to 9, so we'll be wrapping up fairly soon. And I love it. We always get to this point in the conversation, it's getting really juicy and lovely, but we'll keep going for a while. So, and you might be able to answer this, Lorraine. Just a question from Matt: is there anyone who works with older residents with disabilities, etc., on their own plan? So I know you've got the resources on the CFA website, but I can imagine, you know, they need to be connected with the service providers as well. And is there any of that work happening through any of the agencies in town?
That is a question to me?
Yeah.
I think that some agencies cover them, but not all. Like I think the Shire, those people that are listed in their list, you know, where they deliver assistance to, but even in the COVID-19, that assistance was stopped. But, you know, if you're listed on that, you are meant to be able to be helped, but not everybody's listed on it. So,
and I think maybe that's where the sort of local community can come in as well, and, you know, work, you know, with your neighbours or the people in your, you know, local community who are a bit, you know, less able, or, you know, need some support or need some help with information and thinking through the options and all those sorts of things. And somebody's mentioned as well, like people needing support to make their houses safer, or, you know, setting up working bees with your local community for the, you know, the people who can't do that outside work themselves. You know, it's something that I think some communities are thinking about already, like how we can get some neighbourhood brigades going around and helping with some of that labour intensive work that not everybody has the capacity to do. Lorraine?
I heard of some people who are actually doing it by street. You know, that apart from sharing cars, they're also, you know, trying to make their street work together as a community, you know, which is a great idea.
Yeah, that's an excellent model.
The other thing I wanted to just quickly touch on was younger people. So it came up in Fryerstown. There was I think older teenager there, and she said, oh, so what do I do when my parents are at work and I'm at home in the holidays or whatever? And I guess, you know, with us being home a lot more, it's actually something that we really need to think about, and empowering, all ages, I suppose, and, you know, who's missing from the conversation. I guess doing a bit of a gap analysis, who are your supporters, but who can you offer to support, is actually a really powerful thing. yeah, I guess taking, you know, if you see something that needs to be done, there's no reason you can't sort of do it. Like, yeah, community leadership is really powerful, and probably more powerful. You know your communities better than anyone.
And I think, yeah, some of that sort of community mapping that we started in Fryerstown of who are the vulnerable people, I have a problem with that term, but, you know, where are the kids who are going to be alone after school? Where are the people who might be at home without a vehicle because they've only got one vehicle in the family and the partner's at work, or, you know, those sorts of things. So I think, yeah, that sort of really neighbourhood based. And I think that's the real power that the local communities can have in this area, is to actually know each other and know who needs what, and how we can work out how to support them. Yeah. And yeah, somebody's also commented that maybe, you know, in terms of fire, you know, looking after each other, you know, looking at friends and neighbours who might be able to shelter with, if your home isn't fire dependent. Well, that's something we do at Fryers Forest. Like, not all of us have. Some of us had better fire defendable homes than others, and so there's places to retreat to there that are very defendable if people are stuck there. So that's a good tip as well. Look, I'm just aware that we're heading for the end of this conversation. Yeah, I'd just really love to, you know, if you've got any last comments or, you know, ideas that you think it would be really important for people to include in their community conversations. Anybody, like Lorraine, if you've got any last words?
Yeah, I just think it's really important that the information is shared as much as we can by every method that's possible, like in the local newspapers or in community groups, or, you know, if you're very good at gadgets, you know, online or whatever. It's very, very important that we share what we know.
Yeah, absolutely. Hamish?
Something that I think that you and I have talked about recently, which is the that cultural connection to fire. So developing a cultural relationship with fire, so it becomes less fearful for us. So it becomes embedded in our everyday lives, and we can, you know, do that through other great enterprise like storytelling and music and art and just, you know, that whole thing of getting together and sitting around the fire. I mean, it's just about changing our mindset as well. So yeah.
Louise, did you want to, anything you wanted to add?
Mine were just really quotes. So never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. And if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And I guess just I'm studying a unit of a graduate certificate, and it's around healthy and sustainable communities, and don't underestimate the power of connection, I suppose, for both physical and mental health and all the other benefits that come with it. So if COVID has taught us nothing, it's that human connection is something that we really, struggle without. So that's not a CFA message, that's just a Louise one. But
yeah, and I think that is a really lovely place to end this conversation. The power and importance of connection is really what we're all about. And I just want to, as I said, I'd love to continue this conversation, but I really appreciate all of you for spending the time and kicking this off. And hopefully some of those neighbourhood groups will be, we'll probably be contacting you again, and hopefully they'll be pulling in the expertise from you guys and the range of other resources and agencies that we have around to actually, do more of this work on the ground as well. So thank you very much to Louise, Hamish, Lorraine and Cam. And Natalie is here now to have let people know what will be happening in the next little while with the Castlemaine Commons.
Oh, thanks so much, Emma, and thank you, everybody. So what I'd like to say is that we invited a number of the neighbourhood resilience groups to come in tonight and watch the show, and we would really like to encourage those groups to meet in the next fortnight and have a bit of a chat about how they might prepare for the coming fire season. So we also would like to offer facilitation services if any of those groups would like us to come and facilitate a conversation. Our next show is in a fortnight's time, and the topic is going to be building a neighbourhood resilience group. And we're going to have a wide diversity of different people from around Castlemaine that have been involved in neighbourhood groups, building resilience groups. The Castlemaine Commons second series, which is what this one is, our second show of the second series. We're going to have, like I said, the neighbourhood resilience show in a fortnight's time, but we're really up for other topics that people would like to have a conversation around resilience building and our neighbourhood. So feel free to make comments, give us suggestions, give us feedback. So again, thank you everybody, and we're going to have a little clip to take us out.
Thank you.
Just see if I can.